Today is November 18th, 2022. Welcome to the Chapter 49 podcast. My name is Larry Lannan. I'm a volunteer for Chapter 49 and a retiree. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. And Duncan Giles is our chapter president. Welcome once again, Duncan.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
And we have two guests from Washington, D.C. this week. We have Dan Kaspar, who's the Director of Field Operations and Organizing for NTEU. His office is out of Washington, D.C. Dan, welcome back to the podcast.
Pleasure, Larry. Hi, Duncan.
And also we have with us Ken Moffett. He's the Director of Negotiations for NTEU at the national level. Ken, welcome back. Good to have you with us again.
Thank you, Larry. Hello, Duncan.
So what we're going to do here is just talk about a number of issues. The first issue I'd like to bring up here, and there are many that are percolating within the system, has to do with the fact that people, particularly in call centers, but in wage and investment particularly, have been told that they are simply not going to be able to have any annual leave approved during this tax filing season, which really begins at the 1st of January. Normally has been mid-April, although that could be extended. So I'm going to ask Ken, if you would start the conversation and just tell us where that stands and what's going on with that.
Yeah, thanks. So I think back in October or so, beginning of October, an executive that was in or overseeing accounts management sent us an email and basically said that for the upcoming filing season, no accounts management employees would be approved for annual leave as a way to, as she put it, that there would need to be, the agency would try to attain a certain level of service that was extremely high. I think it was 85%. And I think the level of service currently is in the 9 to 11% range. But yeah, the agency, I don't recall this ever happening, and it was not something that they consulted us about, obviously. Employees have for years, not just in accounts management, all federal employees get to take leave. They accrue leave. We negotiate procedures for how they take it. And typically, there's an approval process, and probably about 99.8% of all people or even higher are approved leave. So this was kind of out of the blue, and they made it based on a decision. I think to a certain extent they, asserted that it was kind of being mandated indirectly by Treasury, which we didn't really believe. But the other thing is when we met with them, well, the first thing we did is we talked to them about not going down that path, given the hard work that employees had been putting in over the last several years, which was actually a significantly more work in accounts management because of the various things that Congress had been doing during the COVID-19 pandemic with stimulus checks and that type of thing. So we talked to them about it and pointed out that the contract, this is a area of the workforce that's governed essentially by two collective bargaining agreements. There's a customer service agreement, and then there's the national agreement, both of which essentially pretty much guarantee you that you're gonna have leave. And if you know anything about the job, which the Chapter 49 folks certainly do, it's an arduous, difficult job where you're interacting with taxpayers for 8 or 9 hours a day, and people deserve to take leave. So we talked to them about walking it back, and they essentially refused. We asked them for some data to kind of get a handle on what their level of service has been over the last decade. And, in a good year, I don't think they've ever been above, like 60 or 70%. So the 85% level of service figure kind of struck us as as really not that attainable. I mean, you have to remember that all of this is in the backdrop of the IRS having its budget slashed for over 10 years by Congress, and losing about 25 to 30,000 bargaining unit employees during that decade. So they didn't walk it back, and we filed a national grievance. And based on what we think are violations, pretty clear violations of the contract, both of them. And we're now in the process of prosecuting the national agreement. And of course, we would continue to want them to walk it back or rescind the unilateral actions that they've taken, just because of at least for them, aside from the contract purpose or violations, for the morale and well-being of employees to be able to take a day or a couple of days or a week off of the telephones for their health, well-being, families, and that type of thing. So that's really where that stands. I think that if we have to prosecute it through to like a hearing, I think we would be in very good shape from a contractual standpoint to establish that they don't, they violated the contract.
I would ask Duncan Giles to comment, because Duncan, you were involved in actually negotiating that customer service agreement. And based on what I've heard you say, basically the people negotiating that agreement never imagined a situation like this coming up.
Absolutely, Larry. As Ken said, this is basically unprecedented. This is something that no
Duncan,
one ever
I'm going to ask you
imagined.
to repeat what you just said, because I'm having some glitches here, but go ahead. I think we got you straightened out now.
Okay. Yeah, basically, as Ken said, this is unprecedented. No one ever looked at this when we were negotiating the customer service agreement back in 2012 as a possibility. Nobody ever thought that this could happen. Is there reduced leave during filing season? Absolutely. And that's understood by people on the phones. But to say no annual leave whatsoever, to hit, frankly, a pipe dream of 85% level of service is just, dashing morale needlessly for something that they're going to end up eventually losing.
And I'm sorry, Duncan, we had a little glitch here. I'm trying to fix as we are on the fly here, but before we leave this issue, Duncan, I'm going to ask Ken to comment on this. As employees enter the tax filing season, should they go ahead and request annual leave and document if they are denied?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
That's part of our remedy will be to address denials of annual leave and any other issues that may be associated with that. To the extent that we can legally, we will. We're going to seek every remedy that we can legally obtain for folks to make them whole.
Right, because that would help you if you are looking for remedies. Having that documentation will help. So I just wanted to make sure employees understood that. So that is an ongoing issue right now. Unfortunately, because of the way the federal labor relations system works, it may not be adjudicated by the end of the tax season, but I know that you have tried your best to get some agreement before then. And as you mentioned, Ken, the management has not been cooperative on that.
Yeah, and I would add that there are discussions that are ongoing between NTEU and Treasury and the IRS at a high level about this issue. This is not just something that our leadership, Tony and Doreen, are taking lightly. It's an issue of the highest importance for us, just because of what the impact on employees and their their work lives, their family lives, their need to take a break, obligations that they've had from a year ago for a wedding or any type of thing like that. So it's being addressed actively by NTEU.
Yeah, and Duncan and I are alumni of having worked on those phones, and we absolutely know what you're talking about. And I'm sure people working the phones are going to appreciate hearing that you are still working on an agreement, some way to settle this, even as you go through the system. So thank you. That was a pretty good update on that issue there. It's still in process. Another issue that's come up, and we'll have Dan Kaspar come in and talk about that. And this has to do with something that's called the surge. This was basically forcing people to go from one job to another to work the paper inventory, which had piled up for a long time. And I'd like, Dan, for you to just talk about how that is going. What is going on? Where does it stand now? Where do you think you're going with this whole issue of what people internally at the IRS have been calling the surge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the surge was really, it was kind of multiple mini surges within those, but you summarized them pretty well, Larry, and that was part of what was the biggest issue for people of being involuntarily shifted from one place to another. And at that time, there were 2 surge MOUs that were reached in about June 3rd, I believe, of 2022. And in those surge MOUs, taking what IRS had says was the ending date of those surges, which was September 30th, we agreed to put those into the MOUs, the accounts management MOU and the SP surge MOU, and said it was going to be at the end of that, and that employees were going to be returned either to their position of record for the accounts management MOU, or back to their regularly assigned SBSE work under the submission processing MOU. And in those MOUs, it says you return back to that position or to that work as of October 1st of 2022. And that was supposed to bring relief to a lot of the employees who hadn't yet had, who did not want to be in those surges in the first place. And IRS, came later on down the road, had that MOU signed off and said, these are going to be extended because essentially we aren't anywhere near where we had hoped to be at this point in time. But, the problem was we'd had a lot of employees who they had put their dues in, so to speak. They had done this work involuntarily to try to make this better. And the IRS had agreed that they get to return to their positions of record or to their prior work by that time. We said there may be some people who want to continue to volunteer, and we can work with you to identify who those folks are. But for the employees who did not want to continue on with this, IRS said that they're going to be able to return to this. And this violated them extending past this October 1st date, violated that agreement that they reached with us. There's more to the grievance than that, but that's really the gravamen of what we raised.
Yeah, and Duncan, I'm going to ask you to jump in just for a moment, because I know some people in Chapter 49 have been involved with this. And you and I have talked about how this really does impact employee morale, just like the denial of annual leave for people in W&I. So it's almost like, okay, IRS employees, you're doing a great job. We've done some great work with surging in and having people reassigned to do this paper inventory. And then it's like, okay, sorry, we want more from you. And that's not going over well with the employees, is it?
No, and understandably so. This has a great deal in common with Catch-22. They keep extending and extending and extending what they need to have done because the paper inventory is so bad, or they need more people on the phones. Well, in realistic terms, they're going to have that amount of paper, and they're going to be short on the phones, regardless of whatever types of surge they have. So they might as well go ahead and, I don't know, honor the agreements that they've made. It's a tough concept for them to figure, but this is the dates they agreed to. And so that we feel that they need to stick to it. And I think Dan summed it up very nicely.
So with this grievance pending now, Dan, I'll ask the same question of you that I asked of Ken. What record keeping should employees involved in this do, and what range of remedies are you looking at?
Yeah, from a record keeping standpoint, this one is a little bit it's different, from the grievance that Ken just laid out. Here the violation was just not returning them when they were supposed to be returned. We'll have a decent list of who those employees are, and to the extent that there is any harm, that can be quantifiable that we can take care of on that end, we'll be able to sort of address that. So it's going to be a matter of when employees, were kept on that. The SF50 records will help out with that as well, but we won't need employees to keep records as much here. We are continuing to work, through Ken's shop is doing everything to try to bargain, some additional protections and rights as much as possible for those folks who are on the surge past the extension point right now. But we held the grievance meeting last week. The Deputy Director of Negotiations, Frank Barzakowski, is prosecuting that grievance, and I was on that with him. Didn't hear much in response from IRS in that grievance meeting. We're waiting on a written response to be issued and to address it at that point in time. Just one other last thing that I'll say about this grievance too is the IRS took the position at the beginning for the first surge that basically it can sort of do this without and it tried to do it without bargaining, frankly, at first, saying that this is an emergency under its statutory emergency rights, which are also in Article 3 of the contract. And it cited the pandemic, as the emergency reason for that purpose. Now we knocked that back on them, and Ken's shop got, 2 pretty good MOUs that we're fighting, that we're fighting this grievance with right now. But they ended they pulled back that evacuation order in June, as everyone knows, and employees, returned to the office at that point in time. And so they're citing that same emergency, both pre and post evacuation order, to try to argue that there's not much that NTEU, ought to have to say about this. And we think they're just flat wrong on that.
And just for people who are not into lingo we used in labor relations, MOU does stand for Memorandum of Understanding, which means management and the union have signed on to something. That's what an MOU is. And that's when you hear that acronym, that's what we're talking about. I'm going to stay with Dan for another moment here. There's another issue that has been around for a while. This situation with reasonable accommodations, how reasonable accommodations are being handled. There's an awful lot involved in this. Give us a little background about how we got here and where we are right now on this reasonable accommodation grievance.
Absolutely. We had a busy October, at NTEU in terms of national grievances. So this one really concerned employees. It took forever for them to get, basic responses on their reasonable accommodation request. And I'm not even talking about the final decision on that. I mean, just initial responses. And, there's these, another acronym, RACs, which I know everyone on this call is familiar with, but the Reasonable Accommodation Coordinator, and they're supposed to assist managers who are under the IRM, the actual decision makers in these reasonable accommodation requests. And, frankly, there haven't been enough of these reasonable accommodation coordinators to work through these issues for decades. And then when we had employees returning to the office, we had been telling them for, honestly, 9 months, a year, dating back to when agencies first thought they may be bringing employees back, that you're going to get a surge, to use that term again, of reasonable accommodation requests, and you're going to need to be prepared to handle these. And the IRS didn't really do much to address that issue. We've been telling them that, of the many areas where you need to hire people, this is one of them. So in any event, we have issues where employees were not hearing back, even with initial check-ins, from the reasonable accommodation coordinators for a month at a time. And that's not the way the law is supposed to work. These reasonable accommodation requests, when they're denied, these employees need an answer on this, and they need these reasonable accommodations on as expeditious a basis as possible. And so we essentially said what the IRS is doing is it's trying to triage and deal with the fact that it has these reasonable accommodation coordinators who aren't moving these cases along, and they need to triage them by basically just sending an email that says, all right, everybody, we'll get to you when we can get to you, and we'll see you in a month or so. And that doesn't work for us at all.
Duncan, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this right now, because you and I have talked about this reasonable accommodation issue. It really became an issue with COVID, but it's gone beyond that now. So any question or for Ken or I'm sorry, for Dan in this case, or anything you want to add to that discussion?
I just think that, Dan hit the nail on the head. We were telling them, and, I know NTEU National was telling them, I was telling executives, this is coming up, this boulder is coming down the hill, you better be prepared. And they said, oh, we're prepared. And they haven't. And, I share Dan and Ken and Doreen and Tony's attitude of disgust, frankly, that they can't respond to these employees. I mean, this isn't rocket science. You need to give them a response. You need to do what you are legally supposed to do. And they haven't been able to do it. And so now we have to file a national grievance over this as well.
So Dan, just to remind people, just tell us, where this stands. There are probably people listening and watching this that have reasonable accommodations that are pending. Where does this stand as we talk now?
Yeah, so of course, one thing that we told IRS that it needs to do, even as part of its sort of triage, efforts, is you can grant, and employees are entitled to temporary, reasonable accommodations while you are trying to process some of these. So we had some success in getting that message through to IRS at a national level. As usual, they did not have as much success of getting that message down to the frontline managers, but we continue to press them there. And so we're at a point now where we're holding this grievance meeting. I believe it's going to be the last week of November, and we'll continue to sort of go through that process and press the agency to not only address the issues that have arisen that caused us to need to file this grievance now, but let's fix this going forward.
Yeah.
Let's fix this going forward so that people can actually get answers and this process works smoother. It's not only going to be better for the employees, it's going to be better for these reasonable accommodation coordinators who undoubtedly have more cases, assigned to them than they're used to as well. And just the running theme that goes through these grievances at first, from first to third, the ones we've talked about is we finally, we're hiring people, now at the IRS, which is just a wonderful thing for so many different reasons. And, then the question starts to become, can you keep them? And the source that we've had to file, these 3 grievances over, none of these 3 help in that regard whatsoever.
Yeah, Dan, one thing that I always used to tell people, both as a union official and even when I was a manager, I remind my fellow managers, reasonable accommodation is not just a contract provision, it's the law.
Yeah.
It's right in the law, and you need to follow the law here. And that's my anything you want to add, Duncan, before we move on?
No, that's exactly the point. It's we're hiring all these people, but I think that we're having a lot of people go out the door specifically because of issues just like this. And Dan hit the nail on the head on that.
Let's go back to Ken Moffett, because I know that Duncan has done this numerous times throughout my IRS career. And even as a retiree, I have helped out with orientations when we have new employees coming on board. NTEU would meet with them and always enjoyed doing that. And they had a lot of questions for us. So we always tried to answer everything that they brought up. And this whole idea of having virtual orientations, this is something new. And the question then comes up, how does NTEU get the guarantee in the contract that we as an institution will have our people meet with these new employees during their orientation? That is also a grievance. Tell us, Ken, a little background on that and where we stand with this grievance right now.
Yeah, thanks. The issue with orientations is, you're right that it's in the contract that we have a right. It's a longstanding right that management typically onboards people, for years and years. They would bring them in, swear them in, start the process for them to become official employees, get them equipment, have some classes, orientation classes. And I think a number of different, departments within the IRS would would come in at various times and speak to them. And we had negotiated and had for years enjoyed the right to come in. We have actually in the contract the right to show an NTEU video. I think it's a 12-minute video. And then we have a right to meet with them outside of management's presence for 30 minutes. And that all went a little bit sideways with the pandemic. So in March of 2020, you'll remember that the chief human capital officer issued the evacuation order. And essentially that order, directed all employees to either perform work at home, or if they couldn't, then they were, in various categories. One category, weather and safety leave. But so it was based on the safety of the workforce. And we started meeting with the IRS immediately. Tony and the commissioner got together and said, let's convene a COVID work group or team made up of IRS officials and NTU folks and meet. And we actually, when we first started that, we were meeting probably about 3 times a week. But that was all based on, all of these actions were based on keeping the workforce safe. But the issue that we soon encountered was they were continuing to hire people, backfill positions, hire people. I guess in March, it would have been toward the end of the filing season as all of this is kind of unfolding. But as we went through the summer, they started bringing people back for jobs on the campuses where, the work was not transportable, portable work. And we basically had to figure out a way to, get our right to meet with people in these orientations. And what we did is we reached a temporary agreement during COVID. We would meet with folks. They started onboarding people virtually, and even have them come in or mail them a laptop, come in to pick up like a curbside pickup of a laptop, or they would mail them a laptop. And essentially it was, a way to do all of this stuff virtually to keep them safe, right? To reduce the risk that they would contract COVID. So what we did is we reached this agreement with them on, during the pandemic, that we would onboard folks. They would onboard folks virtually. We would conduct our orientations virtually. And we did that for a couple of years, during the pandemic. We showed the movie. We talked to people over Zoom. We had chapter leaders on the call to conduct the NTU portion of the orientation. And then what happened is when we bargained the return to office MOU, that Dan mentioned, this June date of this year, where they directed everyone to go essentially to return to work and resume normal operations. What we found is that there were a couple of units, I think some of them were at headquarters, where they were trying to continue, not just trying, but they were actually continuing to onboard people virtually, and essentially forcing us to conduct orientations virtually, which is not consistent with our contract right. And, if you know anything about orientations, you can have a lot more of an impact and, give and take and communicate with folks first, in person, face to face, than you can over a computer. So we talked to them about it and said, look, as of the date of the MOU, that IRS was, very hot to get folks back to work. As of that date, you've got to revert back to the contract and the orientations have to be face to face, and they didn't do it. So we filed a national grievance to vindicate our right under the contract to meet with folks. Part of this, admittedly, is, the way that we schedule orientations is that it's adjacent to our portion of the orientation is adjacent to either a break, typically a lunch period where, they're not on the clock, so we can talk to them about membership. That's not a secret. that's just, you know, the way that we've done it for years and years because of the rules that restrict us in conducting internal union business during, you know, periods of time when people are on duty. So, you know, obviously a part of it is our contract right, and a part of that that's important to us is both communicating with people about NTEU, but also communicating with them while they're on a lunch period about joining NTEU. So that grievance is in process right now.
And Duncan, Giles, from the point of view of a chapter president, you know how important it is to have a face-to-face discussion early on in that orientation process for new employees.
Absolutely, it is. You want to get to know them. You want to, you know, as Ken alluded to, if you're sitting there on a computer, it's tough to figure out, okay, do I want to ask questions? What questions do I ask? Where you're having an in-person discussion, it's much easier to make that connection, to have them ask the questions or tell them about things that may not be covered and let them know how NTEU is a resource to them. It's just much easier for everybody to do it in person rather than virtual.
So Ken, how optimistic are you that you'll get a good result out of this?
Very.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really think of a good defense to it. I mean, it's a pretty clear contract, right? And there's about a, you know, 25 to 30 year practice of doing it consistent with the contract. And there's a little blip on the radar of them doing it virtually. And, you know, you can't have it both ways to argue that the pandemic is over and everyone's got to go back to work and then say, oh, by the way, you know, for a couple of units, we're going to continue to do it the way that, you know, that we were doing it during the pandemic. It just doesn't add up.
Okay, Ken, great. That's a great discussion about that. Thanks for the update. I'm going to stay with you, Ken, because there's one other issue that Duncan and I have talked about the last few podcasts, and it's something NT is quite proud of. It's the awards agreement. Employees love it, but there's been an interesting glitch this time. It appears that the employees are seeing their awards show up on HR Connect, but NTEU does not yet have the information. This was a system bargained jointly between the management and the IRS. So what happened here, Ken?
This is not actually a new problem. This is actually an age-old problem.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, what they do is they IRS up, well, independent of Article 18, which, by the way, we are very proud of. In this contract, we got locked in a number of changes to it that are going to ensure that it's a program that's around at least for 3 years, the first half of the contract. It's, you know, it's this contract actually, if you trace the funding of Article 18, back in the day, like 20 years ago, it was about the funding. There was a formula based on the total annual salaries of bargaining unit employees in the prior fiscal year. And back in the day, 20 years ago, I think it was like 1.5%. It grew to 1.6%, then it was 1.75%. And then in 2013, there was a sequestration law enacted, and the IRS had to find about $648 million in April of the fiscal year to cut $648 million. And the person who was the head of the commissioner at the time decided that one of the things to cut would be the performance awards. So it really went down to zero that year, and we negotiated a settlement. But we grew it back to, in the next round of contracts, to 1%, and then now we're back at 2%. Not back at, we're at 2% for the first time, I think, ever. And on top of that, we got the IRS to agree not to take the bilingual awards out of the performance awards pot. So that makes it even larger. But back to the issue that you asked about, which is we get data from the IRS, which we just got last week. It's called a union detail report, and it includes everyone who's eligible for and is going to get an award. And what we do when we get that is we sort it by chapter. And then once we've sorted it and checked it and looked at eyeballed the numbers to make sure that it's essentially accurate from a chapter to chapter standpoint, we will post it. And I think we're going to post that data on Monday. But the problem for us is that the IRS also uploads that data on their own HR Connect system earlier than or about the same time that they give it to us. So that if employees want to, they can go into that HR Connect system and kind of figure out or see. We actually at National NTEU do not have access to that, but employees, as IRS employees, they have access to it. So they can see what their award is going to be. And that causes a little bit of confusion because they're not even hearing from management about it, but they're able to kind of get a sneak peek early on. And then, of course, every year we have mistakes made by IRS personnel in terms of elections, where some employees elect time off in lieu of an award, and they'll find out on HR Connect that they're going to get a cash award, even though they elected time off, and vice versa. And those are things that we traditionally have to correct in the first several weeks of the awards being rolled out.
Ken and Dan, you can talk about this too. I'll give you a little historical story that might be of interest. I was a new steward in the late 1980s when that awards article was first put into the national agreement. And when we implemented that, of course, your award is based on your performance appraisal. What we found out this was most common in long-serving revenue agents, some of these employees had not had a new appraisal for 10 years, some 15 years. So if nothing else, the awards agreement actually had forced the management to give a performance appraisal to every single employee every year. We found out that wasn't even the case.
Yeah. I'm not gonna disparage managers who revalidated appraisals for years or years overtly, but that's one of the things that you would see in various divisions where they would it would be a lot easier for them, depending on how many people they're supervising, to revalidate a number of people. And I think that practice probably continues.
Yeah, these weren't even revalidated. They just were sitting there. Nothing had happened.
Oh, okay. So it's worse than that.
It's even worse. Dan, I think you had something you wanted to say there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's part of the, I think the brilliance of Article 18 and the way that award system has developed under, the acronym of the NPAA, which Ken can give you the acronym for, because I can't remember right off the top of my head, but that's been in development. It's been amended, and it's been put into the contract and improved, over the past 2 decades. And tying that to the appraisals, it gives it that sort of objective standard in there, and using the 55% number, has plus ties, exactly, really makes that award system, I think, the envy of a lot of other agencies, and frankly, part of the reason why it's the best collective bargaining agreement in the contract by many standards.
It's National Performance Awards Agreement.
Thank you.
Yep.
Correct. That's
yeah.
all.
It's the thing that you mentioned, Larry, about your rating. It's designed to be progressive in the sense of it goes up based on rating and grade. So there's 2 components to the formula. So
Yes,
the higher your grade and the higher your rating, the higher your award will be.
Yes, that is correct. That is another component, but it's your performance appraisal is a key part of that. And grade is also obviously a very important part of that. I want to, before we,
Larry, before we leave this, I do want to make the important point that Ken made. For everyone that's asking, and folks watch this across the country, the awards, your chapter does not have the awards information yet. As soon as we get it, we're happy to share it with you, but we don't have it yet. Hopefully it'll be sometime Monday. It may be a little bit later, but don't think we're hiding it or anything like that. It still has to be formulated. Just want to make sure that's clear for everybody.
yeah, in chapter 49, Duncan sends out an email to all the members once it's in, and you're welcome to check them. But if you check with them before that, he's not going to have it. And as our national office people have said, that it takes time to sort that out before they send it out to the chapters, verifying its correctness to some extent, and of course, sorting it out so the chapters have the information they need to have. I'm going to ask Duncan to start, and anybody else who wants to chime in on this. We're in open season for health insurance. I went in the other day on NTEU, which all members have access to at nteu.org. I went into the consumer checkbook, checked out all the health insurance plans, and whether you're a retiree or you are an active duty, it makes no difference. You can still use that. And it's an awesome tool. I more or less verified I've probably got the best insurance plan now that I should have. But Duncan, it's something that I think members need to know. It's there. It's free. You would have to pay for it if you were not a union member. And so you need to just jump in there and take a look at that.
Yeah, as you said, it's really an awesome tool. It's very, very easy to use. I mean, it'll ask you your zip code, your age, and then basically, here are the plans that you're available for. Do you want a PPO? Do you want an HMO? There are these things that you can choose. You can compare plans. I was on it just today during my lunch because I hadn't been on it this year to take a look. And, this year I may or may not change my plan that I got a couple of years ago because there's one that's going to be a little bit better. You check out the plans you like. You contact your regular doctor's office. If you have a regular physician or doctors that you go see, do you take this insurance? If they do, that can be an option for you. You can get the same type of deal that you're getting for the big company that I'm not going to mention their name, but they usually go by initials. And save yourself a heck of a lot of money. So that's why I urge everyone to take a look at this great tool that National provides.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a chance just quickly. Dan Kaspar, this is something NTEU provides as a service to us employees. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, exactly. This is a member benefit of NTEU, and frankly, it's one of the most often cited benefits when I see members talking to others who are hopefully soon to be members as well. A lot of benefits that they share with it, but it's an excellent tool.
Well, we're wrapping things up now. So Ken, any final comments, and what are your Thanksgiving plans?
Family, turkey, sleep.
Very simple. Nice response.
There may be some wine involved.
I'm shocked. Shocked, I say.
Anything for you, Dan? Anything you want to add at the end here, Dan?
I am staying around the Washington, D.C. area looking for a lot of time with family, some football as well. And I will just say that I used to despise stuffing when I was young. And I've become a stuffing connoisseur of sorts, if that's an actual term. And I'm looking forward to some stuffing this year.
I'm sure the stuffing connoisseur is a correct thing to say. Duncan, how about you? Plans for Thanksgiving?
Plans for Thanksgiving are to be with my awesome girlfriend, Kim. We're going to do up turkey stuffing, sweet potatoes, that type of thing, watch some football. And I just want to say, we're not going to have a podcast next week due to the holiday. But one of the things I'm really thankful for, two things I'm really thankful for. One is the great support and guidance we get from not only National NTEU, but also our field offices out there who help out the chapters immensely. Very, very thankful for all the hard work folks at National do. And also I'm thankful to work with a great, great, great bunch of people across the country. Our IRS employees bust their butts. They deserve the time off. And I just hope everybody has a great and happy Thanksgiving. And I'm very thankful for you.
And it should be noted that, Duncan's had a lot to do with many national agreements. The current national agreement, we have the overall agreement. He was there the whole time when the negotiations were going on. Dan oversees all the attorneys that work for NTEU out in the field, and they do a lot of very good work on the ground, helping out chapters and members of the union. And Ken is involved in all the negotiations that go on and that are in the contract. And we've talked about how that contract is being enforced during this particular podcast. So thanks to all of you, all the work that you've done. And Dan, Kaspar, and Ken Moffett, thank you. Duncan, Giles, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure to talk to all of you. I apologize for some of the glitches early on technically, but we are trying to upgrade our equipment, so hopefully that will not be a problem in the future. But it is Thanksgiving weekend coming up. Please enjoy that time. Take a little time off to enjoy some time, as all of us are going to do with our respective families. And just try to recharge your battery, because right after Thanksgiving, we're all back to work again, and there's always plenty of work to do. My name is Larry Lannan. I'm a retiree, and I just do some communications work as a volunteer for Chapter 49. So we thank you very much for watching and listening. We appreciate everyone who takes the time to do that. And we also wish you a great Thanksgiving holiday. Be safe. Please be kind.